Welcome to this session on state-level action on carbon pricing and climate change across Mexico. Thank you very much. We have two wonderful speakers today. We have Ricardo Torres, Undersecretary for Environment, the State of Querétaro, and Jose Baez, lawyer from State of Zacatecas. Thank you very much for being here. You guys may know that Mexico already has an emissions trading scheme in place, but it's not the only thing going on in the country. Many things are also happening in terms of carbon pricing. Subnational states are called to be at the front line of climate change, and carbon pricing mechanism, and specifically carbon taxes, will be the most used tool to put a price on carbon. Mexico already has a carbon tax at the national level, that it's a tax on the content of fossil fuels, but many entities throughout the country have already established carbon taxes by itself. We have a map that we can show, Clau? Or hay una presentación con un mapa, sí. We have a very simple presentation that showcases the amount of states with a price on carbon. The first state to establish a price on carbon is the state of Zacatecas, and fortunately we have Jose here that will talk to us about it in the future. But many others followed. As you can see there in the map, already today 9 different states have a price on carbon emissions. The state of Baja California also established a tax on the content of fossil fuels. Today, the tax is inactive, though it is enacted. Therefore, it's not being enforced as of today. The state of Durango is the newest kid on the block. They passed a tax on carbon emissions by the beginning of this year. The Mexico State, there's a state called Mexico State in Mexico that's all around Mexico City, also has a price on carbon. Guanajuato, a very important state that concentrates most of the car-making plants in Mexico, and most of car-making industry is based there, and very important in terms of emissions. They also have a price on carbon. Jalisco is considering a price on carbon too. Jalisco is very important, crucial for all of us. It's the only producer of tequila, so it's a very strategic state. Querétaro, fortunately here, we'll learn about it. Tamaulipas had a carbon tax, but withdrew the carbon tax in December last year. However, they are talking about it reintroducing the tax this year. Yucatan has an active carbon tax, and Zacatecas with us. As you can see, the price on carbon on the jurisdictions, they differ. They differ on a wide spread, and some of them marked with a dot or with a star. They admit, or they allow to cover the carbon tax using offsets. It's not most of them, as you can see, but some of them they do. Querétaro, of course, Guanajuato, Yucatan, those are the one that already has the carbon tax in place, and the state of Jalisco's proposal, it includes a compensation mechanism that, as you know, has not been passed yet. So in the future in Mexico, we will have the emissions trading scheme and these subnational schemes somehow surviving. That will happen. Eventually that will happen. We're pretty sure about it. So most of these carbon taxes are here to stay. And the tendency is that we will see more and more states adopting a price on carbon. We'll hear more about the capacity of the subnationals, of the states in Mexico to adopt a carbon tax. To begin with, the story of Querétaro, it's very interesting. Querétaro is perhaps one of the most advanced countries in Mexico in terms of environmental regulation, and has a long-standing record on environmental milestones. a very important state by its economy and a very important state by new industry coming to the state. I'd like to present you to Ricardo Torres, Undersecretary of Environment of the State of Querétaro, who will talk us about the price on carbon in Querétaro.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience in terms of climate change policy and, of course, in carbon tax and the implementation of carbon pricing. Can I? Thank you so much. So the story begins some years ago in Querétaro, developing some capacities in the state to report emissions from the industry. More than 14 years ago, we established the mandatory report in the state for all the local sources in the state related specifically with the industry and the agro-industry sectors, in which they have some trainments by the state, calculating the emissions, the sources, the emission factors, many different ways to develop their own inventory. After that, we started to train the industry in terms of circular economy and to identify many different ways in which they can develop projects inside the facilities to reduce their emissions. And we developed also, the next one, please, our decarbonization pathways 2 years ago. We calculate our total emissions. Querétaro is a small state in terms of population, and in Mexico City we are around 100 miles from Mexico City, and we have 2.4 million inhabitants in the state, and we represent around 3% of the economic importance in Mexico. So we have, at the beginning of the 2020, we calculated around 12 million tons of CO2 equivalent as our inventory in the state, and we developed our baseline in which we discovered that in 30 years we can triplicate our emissions if the economy and the population continues in the growing process that we have on the last 20 years. We made the exercise also in retrospective, and we discovered that at the beginning of the century, we were emitting around 6 million tons. So in 20 years, we duplicate our emissions. And then the green line is a line according with the Paris Agreement. And we discovered that we have a huge goal to achieve over the next 7 years at the beginning, and then in the next 27 years also. When I talk with the stakeholders, I always try to explain them that the climate policy begins more or less in 1992 internationally, and we are nearest from 2050 than 1992. Also, we have 27 years to achieve our goals in terms of reduction, and in the implementation of our decarbonization pathways have a cost. We calculated the cost more or less in 1/3 of our total GDP for the state. So the government cannot assume alone the purpose to reduce the emissions and pay for the implementation of that projects that are related for many sectors, industrial sectors, mobility, residential, commercial, institutional, forestry sector, And if you see our graph, most of the best practices and the best projects that can reduce a huge amount of emissions are related with energy providers, industry sector, and mobility. These are, and probably in many states of Mexico, there are the main sectors that are reporting emissions in the state. So when Governor Curi started this administration, more or less 1.5 years ago, he started with the vision of a carbon tax, and then we developed our own exercise, considering the example of Zacatecas that has been developed by Jose, and apply some concepts and some agenda that it was related to Querétaro, and we developed the first compensable tax, carbon tax in Mexico, with I think with a correct price, carbon price that can push forward the execution of the projects. By the moment,
Thank you, Ricardo. Now we have Zacatecas, Zacatecas, Zacatecas. As you may know, Zacatecas, as we always have referred, was the first state to have a price on carbon. They introduced the price on carbon and was later challenged by the national government, by the federation, la federación. With us is Jose Baez. Jose is part of a lawyer's bureau and has a wide experience in the carbon tax dispute between the federation and the state of Zacatecas. Before that, I'd like to ask the public if you guys feel comfortable in Spanish. Yes, perhaps you raise your hands if you speak Spanish. Seems most of us. So, José, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias por la invitación. Efectivamente, soy titular de un despacho de abogados. Soy originario del estado de Zacatecas. Y efectivamente, el carbon tax cobró relevancia en nuestro estado. Cuando inicia este impuesto, la industria local, pues prácticamente no entendía de qué se estaba hablando, no entendía el tamaño, no sabía qué significaba carbon tax, ni qué significaba emisiones a la atmósfera, ni 250 pesos tonelada, no entendía absolutamente nada, pero lo único que acudió fue a nuestro despacho, afortunadamente. Y nos pidió la defensa, claro, fue toda una campaña legal muy importante, muy robusta, que se inició en enero del 2017 en el estado de Zacatecas, principalmente por la industria minera. En Zacatecas se fundó hace casi 500 años precisamente por sus minas. Zacatecas aún es rico por oro, plata, cobre y zinc principalmente. Entonces tenemos mucha inversión canadiense, inversión americana y los grupos más importantes de nuestro país tienen residencia en nuestro estado de Zacatecas. Está Grupo Frisco, Peñoles, Industrial Minera México, en fin. Todos sujetos al impuesto del carbon tax. Pues bien, enderezamos una serie de juicios de amparo. Los ganamos en primera instancia contra el gobierno de Zacatecas. El gobierno de Zacatecas se defendió en segunda instancia. Pero en eso, la presidencia de la República, por conducto del abogado de la presidencia de nuestra República Mexicana, promueve una controversia constitucional contra el gobierno del estado de Zacatecas. Esto dio pauta para que se conociera el asunto en la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación. Pues este debate fue notoriamente relevante y dio pauta a una serie de estudios muy robustos, muy novedosos. Nadie habíamos litigado el carbon tax y inspirados en literatura principalmente norteamericana, en donde se hablan de costos eficientes, en donde se habla de precisamente un impuesto a las emisiones a la atmósfera. La Suprema Corte de Justicia fija y determina que el Estado de Zacatecas tenía competencia y atribuciones para poder poner un impuesto a las emisiones, los famosos impuestos ecológicos. A partir de ahí, gana el Estado de Zacatecas, pierde la industria minera, pierde la iniciativa privada. En el primer round, ahorita les explico por qué. Esto da pauta para que otros estados, entre otros, aquí presente Querétaro, Guanajuato, Yucatán, en fin, otros estados, hagan lo propio y legislaron y establecieron como impuestos, en algunas ocasiones 4 impuestos, en algunas otras ocasiones 3 impuestos, pero siempre con la constante de legislar sobre el carbon tax. Michoacán hizo su intento, pero se bajó, finalmente no quedó legislado. Y bueno, tenemos otros estados con otras experiencias. En términos muy generales, eso fue lo que pasó en Zacatecas a partir de enero del 2017. En el 2019 la Corte dice, Zacatecas tiene atribuciones para legislar, hace lo propio. Por ahí del 2021, la Secretaría de Hacienda de Zacatecas, ante la incertidumbre que aún prevalece en el sector, esto es, cuánto tengo que pagar, cómo lo voy a pagar, genera una figura jurídica que se llama Convenio de Estabilidad Fiscal, inspirado en una serie de convenios que se han hecho en Chile. Esta iniciativa se recoge en Zacatecas y el legislador establece los famosos convenios de estabilidad. A través de estos convenios, el gobierno de Zacatecas ha celebrado precisamente unos acercamientos con algunas compañías y se ha comenzado a pagar este impuesto. ¿Qué tanto porcentaje? Nosotros estimamos entre un 20 a un 40% a lo mucho. Las compañías están pagando este impuesto al carbon tax. Y es actualmente como está el Estado que guarda estos impuestos aquí en el Estado de Zacatecas.
Wonderful, Jose. Thank you very much, and very interesting. Going back to Querétaro, Ricardo, what has been the development of the carbon tax in Querétaro till today? What's the status today, and what we will see in the short-coming future?
Yeah, thank you. As I said before, the Governor Curi started the government with the initiative. At the very, very beginning of the administration, we started to construct the tax model with the local Congress and many of the congressmen in our state. And then the administration begins in October 2021, and the tax was approved by the Congress in December 2021 for the fiscal year of 2022. So 2022 was the first year, the base year for the reports from the industry and agro-industry, from the enterprises that has to pay the taxes, has to be involved in our protocol. And we discussed with the industry and the stakeholders in the state all around 2022, about the mechanism to make the compensation system, the transfer of the reductions between entities, different entities, and sectors that were related, that were related and approved by law to be considered in the tax reduction as a compensation. And also to let the enterprises and the facilities to report their own emissions. All of that passed in 2022. We had a 2022 year full of negotiations with the industry, with the stakeholders, with the entrepreneurs associations, consultants, in order to construct together the way in which we were developing. We also had the technical support from Mexico's CO2 to develop in terms of quality and in terms of what is happening in that kind of models around the United States and also Latin America and the entire world. So we developed a model like that. We do not consider the tax as an environmental income. It's very dangerous if you consider a tax as a permanent income for the government, because the government very quickly takes the tax to spend in many things. So this is the boundary or the limit that it's very dangerous for us to see. And the other one is to avoid, as Jose Baez reported in Zacatecas, the legal processes. This is why we choose the model that has 19 criteria from the federal court in the state, because it could help us to pass the first years or the first moments in the implementation of the tax, avoiding legal processes against the state. So then the objective and the storytelling with the stakeholders was to reduce the GHG and specifically to finance our decarbonization pathways. The purpose of the tax is to finance by public money or by private money, in which the state make the rules, but we don't manage the money. The money can go between the private sector, compensating emissions, investing in different kind of projects that can reduce emissions in the state and also in the region or in the country, to compensate our emissions. Then we establish the legal basis, we make it compensable. It was when I started the process, I fixed the non-negotiable aspects or topics from the tax and many other things that can be negotiable with the stakeholders. Non-negotiable was it should be necessarily a compensable tax because it was aimed to reduce emissions, not to have an extra income for the state. So when you establish this, necessarily you need to establish a good price, because in other way, there are not going to be projects cheaper than the tax, and the companies would prefer pay the tax instead invest in projects that can reduce emissions inside the facilities or outside in a compensation system. So it was a non-negotiable. So after that, of course, the price of the tax is negotiable, but it has a limit. The limit was based in two principles. The first one, that can allow the companies to invest in some projects that can reduce emissions inside the companies. First, necessarily enough incentive inside the companies, because in the other way, you need to pay a tax. And the other, if the companies decide to pay the tax, considering the social cost of the carbon in Latin America. So we took part of the price from study from Economic Commission for America, from Latin America, that is a commission from the United Nations, that is their office in Chile. They developed a study all across Latin America, and they discovered that the social cost of carbon is around $26 per ton. So this was our first price in the state. We're now 31 or 32, considering inflation, and considering that our Mexican peso is in a strong moment in this moment, so they push it into a $32 over the last year. So the perspective of in the near future for the tax is to really address the developing of many projects in the state or the region, and in terms of emissions reductions. We construct an ordinance and a policy that can aim the efforts from the stakeholders and the state and many other participants, developers also, in terms to develop projects in Querétaro to reduce emissions. And on the other hand, the amount that the facilities has to pay, because not all the amount of the tax can be compensated. We're aimed to develop some infrastructure in the state related with vulnerability for our citizens and adaptation infrastructure that can help us to reduce the impacts of climate change in the state, especially in the poorest localities and municipalities of the state.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ricardo. A very, very comprehensive approach from Querétaro. It's Mexico's proud climate change policy. Jose, let's go back to Zacatecas. Wonderful Zacatecas. Would you please describe us, you were just telling that around 20-30% of those companies supposed to pay the tax were actually now starting to pay. Describe us the landscape. What's what are these companies? What do they do? How do they behave now? And what do you see the tax moving forward in the future?
Sí, gracias. En Zacatecas, la industria minera, como les comentaba, tiene una relevancia notoria. Principalmente, algunos son líderes en el sector, y en Zacatecas tenemos una de las minas más importantes a nivel regional y de América Latina. Pues bien, esta compañía lamentablemente perdió los 4 amparos. Pero esta compañía tiene un ritmo de consumo de energía gigante. Estamos hablando más o menos de unos 16 a 18 millones de litros de diésel al mes. Esto, más el consumo de agua, más el tema de residuos, hace que el proyecto minero sea notoriamente un tema ambiental muy relevante. ¿Qué es lo que ha pasado? Pues bueno, al verse perdidos en la parte legal, ellos sí se acercaron al gobierno del Estado de Zacatecas y negociaron un acuerdo. Para que más o menos nos demos una idea, este tipo de acuerdos para este tipo de clientes, en este tipo de ritmo de consumo de energía, estamos hablando que los acuerdos rondan entre los 500 a 700 millones de pesos al año. Entonces, el carbon tax se vuelve algo notoriamente relevante para el sector. Definitivamente son compañías que afortunadamente ahorita los valores lo pueden pagar. Son compañías de oro principalmente, y ahora en los mercados puede soportar este nivel de pago de impuestos. En concreto en Zacatecas, entonces, podemos decir que los contribuyentes más relevantes son la industria minera y la industria cervecera. Ahí tenemos una de las fábricas de cerveza más importantes a nivel mundial, del Grupo Modelo, y también está sujeta a este proceso pero aún no han terminado de concluir toda la toma de decisiones para continuar con el pago de estos impuestos. También creo algo muy importante, que el diseño del impuesto ecológico, cuando menos en Zacatecas, se puede mejorar. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? El carbon tax va dirigido a la empresa que consume energía, pero está incluyendo las emisiones directas y las indirectas. Y las indirectas las entendemos muy bien desde el punto de vista ambiental. Forma parte de la huella de carbono. Pero en la práctica no es otra cosa más que los contribuyentes pagan por sus emisiones, pero también están pagando por las emisiones hechas por la Comisión Federal de Electricidad. Entonces, ahí entra un gran debate y ha dado oportunidad a nuevos medios de defensa. Esto es, aún no ha concluido la etapa de litigios a la cual algunas compañías todavía pueden acudir, en donde se puede revisar el diseño del carbon tax. Creo que finalmente esto no les va a llevar a otra cosa a las empresas más que ganar un poco de tiempo, unos 2 años, 4 años, 5 años, pero yo pienso que el carbon tax llegó a México para quedarse, siguiendo esta tendencia mundial, y lo relevante y lo importante es que esto efectivamente cumpla el objetivo para el cual fue diseñado. Esto es, que las compañías inviertan en tecnología tendiente a evitar los impactos al medio ambiente que generan con su actividad. Esto es, que inviertan en descarbonificación, que migran de una matriz fósil a una matriz no fósil de energía. Eso es lo que verdaderamente se debe de cumplir. Nos falta mucho, culturalmente, políticamente y empresarialmente. Todavía hay mucho que avanzar en este punto.
Thank you, José. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going now back to Querétaro. We have 2 more questions, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. We're going back to Querétaro. Ricardo, I'm sure that you and your team have faced several challenges in the actual implication of the carbon tax, the design of the carbon tax, and talking to the private sector. I was wondering if you could just talk us about it. And one more thing, linkages, vinculaciones, linkages with any other jurisdiction that you might be thinking, or through the compensation mechanism. What about your expectations for the future in this sense?
Okay, yeah. As I said before, the non-negotiable aspect of the tax was the compensable way in the implementation, and it was intimately related with the cost. So we see possibility with other states in Mexico if they consider this kind of design, if they consider a compensation system inside the designing of the tax, and a good price to make it possible. If our neighbors are considering taxes from $4 and any project at least consider $13 per ton, automatically we are talking about non-compensable taxes. Even if the legal literature of the tax in their own states consider the possibility to compensate their emissions, the cost limitate in a huge way this possibility. So if we see some other state that can be with us in a good projects in order to compensate the emissions, we are going to try to establish a subnational system that can develop together projects in a region or inside the country with the same priorities, the same quality of information, the same certifications, validations, and all the topics around the carbon price. And also we are interested to have a carbon tax model that can be considered a good example in terms of global action. We are sure that we are making local action with global implications. And for example, this year we are considering international projects because of the lack of local and national projects validated and certified in reductions. So we are considering more or less the same that is considering here in California or the American Registry or even BERRA in terms of what we can accept in what we can do to certify our reduction. So we are open to have and to make the alliances with the other states or other countries that are looking for the same thing in especially in Latin America, but also in America, considering the necessity of the people to have a sustainable develop of their territories and also a sustainable way to push over the next years an example and a method in which we develop the carbon tax.
Wonderful, Ricardo. So linkages, yes, coming forward. Jose, going back to you. You've just mentioned that carbon taxes are here to stay, here in Mexico. To stay, and will stay there. And there are a fast and simple solution for subnationals, for states to adopt. What do you see the way forward in terms of challenges for new states to adopt a carbon tax? And for those existing carbon taxes, what challenges do you see in the future?
Sí, definitivamente la jornada de litigio aún no ha terminado. Es el primer round, por así decirlo, o si fuera un partido de fútbol, vamos 1-0. Vamos 1-0, va ganando la autoridad y creo que va a quedar. Les repito, el carbon tax llegó para quedarse. ¿Qué es lo que veo? Veo que va a continuar en menor medida una serie todavía de defensas legales, pero lo que sí veo es que otros estados van a adoptar el mismo criterio de continuar con la valoración de establecer el carbon tax. También la tendencia que hemos observado es que cada vez más los corporativos están analizando y entendiendo qué significa descarbonificación o qué significa cambiar la matriz de consumo de energía, y creo que ahí es en donde se abren nichos de oportunidad muy relevantes. No podemos decir que no hay buenas prácticas por los corporativos. En realidad, hoy a esta mina le dices, ya no consumas diésel, y te dicen, ok, ¿cuál es el sustituto del diésel hoy en Mazapil, Zacatecas? Mi necesidad son 16 millones de litros al mes. Mis equipos son de diésel. ¿Qué hago? No lo consumo. ¿Cuál es la solución? Electrificación, hidrógeno. Bueno, podemos hablar al respecto. Y todos, no hay una compañía que rehúsa al cambio. Lo harán de manera gradual. Lo que yo veo es que las autoridades estatales están viendo este tema como un efecto meramente recaudador. Con respeto lo digo, y a ver si no me jalan las orejas ahí en el rancho, pero ¿qué han hecho con tanto dinero que han recaudado? El estimado más o menos supera los 2,000 millones de pesos en los del 2017 al 2023, y que nosotros sepamos no conocemos acciones tendientes al tema de acción climática, migración de matriz de consumo fósil a la descarbonificación. Entonces, hay mucho reto, hay mucho por hacer y la verdad, pues, la idea es contribuir al respecto.
Wonderful. Jose, thank you very much. Seems we have clear pictures from Zacatecas and Querétaro. Now we will open the floor for questions. We have two. Let's go with both of them. Can you stand up?
Hi everybody, Tania Blasco from Costa Salvaje. I'm going to say first name in Spanish and then I'm going to translate myself. Entendiendo, bueno, lo que se sabe un poco más sobre cómo funciona el mercado de los impuestos al carbono. Es como funciona en general en México, que el impuesto va, digamos, a la Bolsa General de Hacienda y ahí ya todo se pierde y ya luego Hacienda dice que se va a qué, o tienen realmente cada impuesto de carbono una etiqueta específica. I just want to know a little bit more about carbon taxes in Mexico, and I want to know if it's like a general taxes that the Minister of Taxes, Hacienda, they just pick up that taxes and go to a big budget, or if each tax have a specific level that describe what is the final objective of that taxes. Esa es mi pregunta. Gracias.
Thank you. We go with the next one. We pick two.
My question goes toward, have you ever gone to Costa Rica? Everything is carbon neutral. The car is carbon neutral, the bus is carbon neutral, the city wants to be carbon neutral, and even the meat that they sell, we went to a farm and it was carbon neutral. And I see that the protection that you can get from the community and everybody adopting this, it's very good. I don't know, at the level of the governments, it's being done to push that. Also, okay, we have this that helps, but also we're going to give you these, you're carbon neutral, so you're going to get these more other things, or you're going towards that. Just related to tax, that something that includes the community that can recognize the companies. Because I'm thinking the big companies, the transnationals, I think they're going for this. They're going for this for their markets, their own markets. But maybe some Mexican companies that don't feel thinking about the future or hurts too much on their money, but if they feel the pressure of other companies and also the communities, involving the community, saying, hey, this is good for us, this is good for the community, and they're doing this job, maybe that communication also can help, besides just the going through the law system, but also, hey, if a lot of people, if not consumers, don't like something of a company, the company could disappear. So I think that's very strong, and I don't know these things in some states.
Thank you. Thank you, Octavio.
In the first question, in the case of Querétaro, the tax is labeled for adaptation and reduction of vulnerability infrastructure and for environmental projects, because part of the tax are going to be directed to the companies in order to pay for them some of the cost of the development or the technology that they need to in order to reduce their emissions. A part of the tax. In the other part has been invested in infrastructure, public infrastructure, to reduce the vulnerability of the city and also the communities. And it's by law. It's developed since the beginning with this vision.
Perfect. Thank you, Ricardo. José.
Sí, en ese mismo sentido, efectivamente, cuando menos en el Estado de Zacatecas, que estableció los impuestos, sí establece en el artículo 36, ahí refiere en qué se debe de gastar los recursos recaudados. Nada más que viene una palabrita que dice, podrá gastarse en cambio climático. Al momento no sabemos en qué han gastado toda esa inversión. Es una pena porque creo que es una cantidad importante que puede generar un verdadero círculo de ganar todos.
Thank you, Jose. We will take two more. Luisa?
The other
Oh.
question?
You want to go with the other one?
and-
Okay. Then we go with Octavio's, and
Yeah.
then we take one more, two more.
Okay, and in terms of social support for the law from the communities, it's one of the things that we are developing right now. Our ordinance from the carbon tax and the compensation system established that if we have local projects, the company should pay in first term the local projects, and then if we have national projects certified and verified with the legal basis of our system, then they should pay in national projects. And if the case is that we have not local or national projects according with the demand, they can also buy offsets in an international market. So right now, more or less in numbers, I said before that the inventory was 12 million tons of CO2 equivalent. From the industry, we are reporting around 3 million tons. And the compensation possibility is 20%. So we are generating a demand about 500,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. In Querétaro, in our territory, we have around 40,000, only 40,000 tons certified in forestry sector. And it goes mainly for the communities, for the farmers, for the owners of the land, and they can get this money in first term. And we are developing more projects inside the state in order to have this social support that you have mentioned, but it takes some time because first we need the demand, and the demand generates the offer of the project. So in Sierra Gorda, for instance, they are very good notices about the model, because the people knows that they can have some money from the state to take care of our nature, of our territory, and probably in the next 4 or 5 years we are going to increase in a good rate the people involved in our tax.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. So then we will take now 2 questions. Luisa, Teresa.
I'm curious, how are some national taxes going to survive or coexist with the newly created ETS?
Very good. Teresa?
My question was around the number that you first fixed to $35, and then after that, because of the inflation and other stuff, it raised to 31. Do you think that's going to change in time with, I don't know,
Yeah. Well, the first one? Yeah. The first one is we are complementing the federal proposals. We are in constant contact with INEC, National Institute. We have several meetings over the last year. And if some company needs to report some reduction at a national level, we recognize this reduction automatically in our system. So we complement the federal system. But on the other hand, as Eduardo said in the morning, our federal government increased the NDC for 35% up to 2030, but they are not considering any reduction coming from the national market. So I don't know in which way they are going to manage are they going to manage this? But in the NDC proposed for the in the last scope, they are not considering reductions coming from the national market. And in the other hand, yeah, it was a natural way to behavior because it's in UMAS, our tax. And UMA have a yearly actualization according with the inflation, and in terms of in dollars with the conversion, but the price could be increased over the next year, keeping the spirit of the tax to be compensable. If the price in the market grows, necessarily the price of the tax should grow.
Thank you, Ricardo. ¿Sí? Fine. Okay, so next round of questions. Anyone has a question? This is the time. Blend mandate. Sorry, come again?
Ethanol blend mandate.
Ethanol. Okay.
Excelente pregunta, me gustó, aunque no es exactamente el tema del carbon tax, pero creo las iniciativas sobre etanol en nuestro país lamentablemente no han llegado a buen curso. El combustible principalmente lo maneja Pemex. Pemex intentó comprar etanol, licitó, y cuando ganó, el que ganó era del extranjero. Entonces canceló la licitación. Lo hizo por segunda vez. El que ganó salió a 8 pesos el litro, notoriamente no iba a poder hacerlo, lo canceló. Desde entonces se diversificó luego en San Luis Potosí para hacerlo de manera regional y no prosperó. Actualmente en nuestro país sigue comprando MTBE, metilterbutil éter, para mezclarlo con nuestros combustibles, y lamentablemente no está desarrollando la infraestructura para el etanol. En lo personal considero que es un desacierto, porque es un verdadero motor para los biocombustibles. Y se está privilegiando otros mercados en lugar del impulso al desarrollo rural, el desarrollo de proveeduría local, con todos los beneficios que para todos es notoriamente cierto. No hay una infraestructura de mezcla. Sí tenemos una ley, una norma oficial mexicana del 5.6% para mezclarse del etanol. Se subió hasta el 10% en una iniciativa que luego fue motivo de debate y la Suprema Corte cuestionó que el etanol fuera bueno para el medio ambiente. Entonces, lamentablemente, nuestro país está estancado en unos combustibles de los 80s, de los 90s, cuando en Estados Unidos la mezcla del etanol del 5 al 10, al 15, al 20, al E85, pues es parte ya de los mercados. No se diga en Sudamérica, no se diga Brasil, Colombia, en fin. Entonces, lamentablemente el etanol no ha nacido en México. Tenemos una biorefinería estancada que es de Stilmex en Sinaloa, impulsada por el gobierno federal y local, y no prosperó. La de Benito López en Tamaulipas también no prosperó. Y tenemos más de 250 biorefinerías en Estados Unidos. Entonces, ¿por qué no se ha impulsado en México? Es uno de los grandes cuestionamientos que, como parte de la industria de los biocombustibles en México, pues seguimos en pañales. Es una pena.
Wonderful answer, José. Ricardo?
Yo iba a decir lo mismito que José.
Lo que dijo, calcado.
But in English.
Okay, so then we're going to take one more. We'll have 5 more minutes. This is your chance, yes.
Can you tell us more about how you measure harms that are being passed? I can imagine, like, if the organization knows that they're being taxed, maybe collecting the data is not that simple. So how you collect data that you're going to be working with?
From the report? Yeah, we are annually collecting the report. We have been doing by 16 years in Querétaro. We developed capacities over the past decade in the industry sector in Querétaro to use emission factors and to identify sources and convert into greenhouse gases and CO2 equivalent. And we developed some guides to follow for all the industry sector, and we offer 4 or 5 training courses at the beginning of each year with the new personnel and employees from the facilities to report the emissions and many topics around the environmental behavior of the companies in the state. So the data is managed by the state in accordance with the federal law of the protection of data and managing data. And we also publish by law also a report, an annual report of the emissions of greenhouse gases and other pollutants in the state, considering the location of the companies and the name of the companies only.
The carbon tax en Zacatecas, la manera en que lo cobran, no miden a las industrias, no establecen una medición. El gobierno llega a la industria y le pide las facturas de diésel, gasolina y energía eléctrica o gas natural, y a partir de la factura hacen la conversión en CO2, emisiones de carbono, de dióxido de carbono, y en Zacatecas es 250 pesos la tonelada de carbón. No hacen pruebas, no hacen mediciones, tienen sistemas globales y generales estatales, pero no hacen mediciones a los contribuyentes, se van sobre las facturas de la energía.
Wonderful. Then we need to wrap up now, but you guys see subnational level action. You know that we will continue to be in Mexico at the front line of climate change. And putting a price on carbon is crucial to generate more projects, more emission reductions, and become more ambitious. So we will definitely see more carbon pricing instruments. And one more thing, we have an annual event in Mexico also. We'd like to invite you to the Mexican Carbon Forum in Querétaro this year in August 14th and 15th. It would be great to see you there. We're going to talk about, of course, the Querétaro market, other subnational markets, the national market in Mexico, and markets in Latin America in general. You would be more than welcome. It's a wonderful place, wonderful city, and we're going to have a good time together. Thank you very much.